We've been looking at the life of David on Wednesdays, as it is much of it is recorded for us in the scriptures. And today, I'm going to look at another time in David's life where he messed up. David, a man after God's own heart. David, a man who was righteous a lot of the times. David, who did a lot of good things, was very faithful to the Lord, but he wasn't perfect, of course. None of us have been perfect in our lives. And David is no exception, as we even saw last time, where, David at times had a problem with his temper and did not think clearly and was saved from some mistakes. Well, there's one mistake, and we've talked about it in the past. You can read about it in 1 Samuel chapter 6, as it were. I think that's right. Let me double check and make sure. No, not chapter 6. It was 1 Samuel. Oh, no, I think it's actually, I'm thinking of 2 Samuel. It was 2 Samuel chapter 6. We'll read about when David was trying to bring the Ark of the Covenant back to Jerusalem. But I actually want to look at the account today in 1 Chronicles chapter 13. If you'll turn there with me or listen along as we look at this in 1 Chronicles chapter 13, we actually have a bit more detail, a bit of a better view of all that went on. And this is, again, in chapter 13 here, where David has the idea, and a good one, to bring the Ark of the Covenant back to Jerusalem, where it belongs in the city of God. And David says in verse 1, or it says that David consulted with the captains of thousands and hundreds and with every leader. David said to all the assembly of Israel, "If it seems good to you, and if it is of the Lord our God, let us send out to our brethren everywhere who are left in all the land of Israel, and with them to the priests and Levites who are in their cities, in their common lands, that they may gather together to us. And let us bring the ark of our God back to us, for we have not inquired at it since the days of Saul." And so that is David's idea. He is talking to the leaders of the people about. So all the assembly said that they would do so, for the thing was right in the eyes of all the people. And it's a good idea to do this, to honor God, and to get the Ark of the Covenant back where it needs to be. So David gathered all Israel together from Shihor in Egypt to as far as the entrance of Hamath, to bring the Ark of God from Kirjath Jearim. And David and all Israel went up to Baalah, to Kirjath Jearim, which belonged to Judah, to bring up from there the Ark of God, the Lord, who dwells between the cherubim, where his name is proclaimed. Now here's where David has a lapse in judgment. David's idea is good and well-intentioned, but the thing about much of these things, like the Ark of the Covenant and the tabernacle, and even we'll see later, eventually with the temple, is God has instructions and commandments in a certain order of things. Well, David didn't think about that. Because in verse 7, we're told that they carried the Ark of God on a new cart, which we'll see is not what they were supposed to do, from the house of Abinadab. And Uzzah and Ahio drove the cart. Then David and all Israel played music before God with all their might, with singing and harps and stringed instruments, on tambourines and cymbals and trumpets. And when they came to Chidon's threshing floor, Uzzah put out his hand to hold the ark, for the oxen stumbled. And one thing about the Ark of the Covenant is you were not to touch it. And if you touched it, you were going to die. You're going to be struck. And so the anger of the Lord was roused against Uzzah, and God struck him because he put his hand to the ark, and he died there before God. What a tragedy. It was sad. Again, Uzzah meaning nothing ill, but a lapse in David's judgment led to a lapse in Uzzah's judgment, and Uzzah did something he was not supposed to do. And so God struck him down, struck him dead. Well, David, in verse 11, David became angry because of the Lord's outbreak against Uzzah. Therefore, that place is called Perez Uzzah to this day. Or an outburst against Uzzah is the idea of the name. But then David was afraid of God that day, saying, how can I bring the ark of God to me? And that is the first question. Okay, number one, David shouldn't be mad at God, because David's the one who didn't think the way he should have. David's the one who didn't ask this question before, how can I, or how am I supposed to go about transporting the Ark of the Covenant? Let me ask of the Lord. Let me make sure we're doing this right. So really, David should be upset with himself, as he's going to realize, not at God. God gave the instructions. The instructions were there. And so for Uzzah to be punished was an unfortunate circumstance, but it really happened because of David's lapse in judgment. Well, then David would not move it from where they were. They left it. They took it aside in the house of Obed-Edom, the Gittite. The ark of God remained there in his house 3 months. The Lord blessed Obed-Edom and all that he had. Well, some time goes on. David is there at Jerusalem. The Philistines are defeated. Let's jump to chapter 15. So some time goes by, and now David gets back to, we got to do something about the Ark of the Covenant. David built houses for himself in the city of David, chapter 15, verse 1. And he prepared a place for the Ark of God and pitched a tent for it. Then David said, here we go, no one may carry the ark of God except for the Levites. For the Lord has chosen them to carry the ark of God and to minister before him forever. So David gathers all Israel together at Jerusalem to bring the ark of the Lord to its place where he had prepared for it. And so he assembles all these together. You can read about through these verses. I'm not even going to try to pronounce all of these names. So David gets them all together. Verse 12, he says to them, you are the heads of the fathers' houses of the Levites. Sanctify yourselves, you and your brethren, that you may bring up the ark of the Lord God of Israel to the place I have prepared for it. For because you did not do it the first time, the Lord our God broke out against us because we did not consult him about the proper order. And there is where David acknowledges his mistake. I don't think David's blaming them, the Levites and the priests and such, for this. But he's saying, the first time we should have had you do it because you're the ones that are supposed to do it and carry it with the poles and all of that. We can read about all the instructions, go back, previously in the Old Testament where God gave very specific instructions of how it was to be carried, who was to carry it. Well, the first time, David didn't consult God. And David just did what he thought was okay. But it ended up not being okay. And so now, thankfully, in chapter 15, David wants to do it the right way. Do it in the way that is pleasing to God. And so we see them do that. The Levites, the priests, all these are appointed, and they bring it to the city. They're playing the instruments. We read verse 25. So David, the elders of Israel, and the captains over thousands went to bring up the ark of the covenant of the Lord from the house of Obed-Edom with joy. And so it was, when God helped the Levites who bore the ark of the covenant of the Lord, they offered 7 bulls and 7 rams. David was clothed with a robe of fine linen, as were all the Levites who bore the ark. The singers and Chenaniah, the music director or music master, with the singers. David also wore a linen ephod. Thus all Israel brought up the ark of the covenant of the Lord with shouting, with the sound of the horn and trumpets and cymbals, making music with stringed instruments and harps. And as the ark of the covenant of the Lord came to the city of David, we're told that David was whirling and playing music. This was a time of celebration. This was a parade. This was a time of joy. And this time it worked and went well, and they were blessed and they were helped by God because they consulted God, his pattern, his way, his order, and they did it in the way that was pleasing to God. There is, of course, a lesson there for us. That God, through his word right here, in this book we call the Bible, God has clearly given us his instructions, his word, his will, and what is pleasing to him. God has given us his way of salvation. God has instructed us in the way that we are saved. God has instructed us in the way we are to live. God has instructed us in the way we are to worship him. God has given us all that we need for life and godliness right here. The question is, are we following it? Are we abiding in it? Are we consulting God, his word, for the decisions we make in our lives, for the things we believe, for the things we do? And are there times, maybe now, maybe not, where we have a lapse in judgment? Maybe we're not consulting God like we should. Maybe we're just doing things the way we think is okay, the way, we're just kind of going to do whatever we think is best. But as we see from David's example here, it is unwise and it is wrong to do things the way we think. The way we think is pleasing to God. Because we can know for a fact what is pleasing to God, what is not pleasing to God right here. To consult him, to follow his order, to truly be pleasing to God. So let's learn from David's mistake. That time in David's life where he messed up. He didn't consult God, he had a lapse in judgment, but David corrected it. There were some consequences, but David ended up realizing his failure and making it right. And we can do the same, thankfully, by the grace and patience and mercy of God. When we mess up and make a mistake, we can come back to God for forgiveness and consult him and his word and get back to doing what is pleasing to him. And thanks be to God for that. Let's continue to work on that. Follow the word of God. Follow Jesus. And let's not follow our own way. God bless.